This podcast is brought to you by Raising Mama, a bamboo baby brand dedicated to empowering moms during postpartum and raising awareness about maternal mental health. Raising Mama's buttery soft bamboo pajamas aren't just designed to help babies sleep better, they're made to support mothers too. And for every pair sold, a portion of the proceeds is donated to Postpartum Support International. As a thank you for listening, enjoy 20% off your next order with code RaisingMamaVillage at checkout, because we're all in this together. Coming up.
I think as parents, we're bombarded with information, right? Of you should do this, you should do that for your baby, you should do that for yourself. And it's like, it's so much, especially in the modern day era with social media and the internet and all that. And I think if we stop and take it all down a notch and start with the basics, you will realize that you're actually doing more than you probably think you are.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, mamas.
Welcome back to Raising Mama.
I'm Megan.
And I'm Chelsea.
I'm a divorced mama of 2 toddlers, sharing custody while running my own business.
And I'm a full-time nurse, pregnant with my second baby, and married to a stay-at-home dad.
Join us while we talk about the most pressing issues related to postpartum and new parenthood. Before we dive in, hit the subscribe button for more expert insights and honest conversations on Raising Mama podcast. Moms, if you feel like your baby's schedule is running your life, or worse, you have no schedule at all, this episode is for you. Jessica Irwin, a pediatric occupational therapist and childhood routine expert, is here to reveal the simple, science-backed secrets to creating a stress-free routine that actually works. Say goodbye to the chaos and hello to a rhythm that makes life easier for you and your baby. But before we dive in, we have a quick favor to ask. We're a small podcast trying to help as many moms as possible, and the best way you can support us is by subscribing. That's it. Just hit that subscribe button. It's the only thing we'll ever ask of you, and it makes a huge difference in getting this content to moms who need it. So let's get started. Welcome, Jessica. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. And just a side note to everyone listening, Chelsea is not here today because she is having a baby. So she's sitting this one out, but kind of on brand for her to be having a baby. So I think the episodes when she comes back are going to be extra interesting. But anyways, Jessica, yeah, I found you on social and I love your account. It's called Rooted in Routine. And I have so many questions. Routine is such a big part of mom life. And I know that after you have a baby, I feel like it's one of the biggest things that kind of gets you feeling normal again, because your routine changes so much. So just in your opinion, and how after talking to lots of moms about this and, with all of your research, what's the biggest misconception that you think new parents have about baby routines that might be making things harder for new moms who are and new dads who are trying to create structure in their day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it kind of changes depending on who you ask. But I think something that I love to talk about on my Instagram and with my community in general is that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach. And I think as a society, and especially in motherhood and parenthood in general, we get stuck into you're either in this camp or you're in this camp, right? People think you have to follow a schedule with your baby, or you're the type that wants to follow a schedule, put your baby on a schedule, have your sleep times, your feeding times, or you're the total opposite. You go with the flow type of a mom. You don't want any sort of structure and you're going to kind of follow baby's lead for everything. And yes, there are people who fall into both camps, but I think the majority of us fall somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so I like to share that there is a middle ground approach. There's a way to kind of find the pieces of each that work for you,
right,
while making sure we're, following optimal baby and child development and what we know about evidence too along the way as well.
Yeah. I feel like the whole schedule thing is really drilled into, and it probably starts I remember having the baby and the hospital gives you a sheet and you have to track their feeds and their, their diaper the pees and poops and everything, which makes sense because they're like, you have a job, you have to feed them, and like, you need to keep track of this. But I think that's sort of when that mentality starts, and, like learning that how often they need to feed, right? So that's, I think, where that starts getting pushed on you. And it's like so tricky, right? Because like babies are all different, and like you just want to do things right, But like, just so that you can break it down a little more, like what's the real difference between a schedule and a routine? Like, why are people kind of falling short because they're mixing them up? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes. I love this question. This is like, I could like nerd out on some of the like semantics, but we won't have to do that.
Nerd away. Like,
yeah, but that's why I named my business Rooted in Routine, was because the word routine has such meaning. And I think we get confused about how is it different than a schedule? Is it different than a schedule? And ultimately, right, doesn't even matter. But if we kind of zoom out just to define each, when we talk about a schedule, we're really linking activities or steps of things to a time. So we're using the clock to guide, right? And there are definitely parts of baby development and child development in general that a schedule or times like by the clock can be helpful. But in the baby months, oftentimes trying to grasp at following specific times on a clock will drive you insane. And it's not really how babies operate. But that being said,
it's hard. I feel like it's hard to keep track of too, like, because you're having to check the clock all the time. And I don't know, for me, maybe it's just because I have ADHD, but like, I'm like, it's just like, I feel like I would need to set alarms for things, because otherwise I become like hyper obsessed with like checking what time it is, which is just like a whole nother stress on its own.
Yes. It's very easy to become hyper fixated on it too. And I think nowadays, especially, there's all these apps out there that, I mean, this is kind of like a tangent, but they can make life helpful because you can track overall patterns and see like, how often does my baby generally eat? How often do they, like, how long do they generally sleep for? When did they last poop? Right? Because it's good to know the general patterns of those things. Especially if there are any concerns from like a medical or developmental perspective, it is important, right? But I think for like 90% of moms, it's easy to take it too far and get very obsessive with the apps and the tracking. And so I think in some ways the apps and the hyper tracking can do a lot more harm than good. But again, you kind of have to know yourself. And there's definitely people whose personalities like vibe with things better than another. But yeah, the clock is stressful. And I think it does cause more stress to moms, especially in the first few months after you have a baby, because you're operating now on a 24-hour clock, right? You're kind of awake at all hours of the day. So it's like 24 hours are available to you.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about routine, to just kind of bring it back to that word, we're not really talking about the time that things are happening. We're really just talking about the steps and the order in which things tend to happen, and making that predictable or as consistent as you can, from day to day or from time to time, is what we mean when we say routine. So I like to give the example, or, to show that there is a routine to your general day, right? There's a flow to your day, and that could be your routine overall. And a lot of moms have a goal to work towards getting that for their baby, because it helps their baby and it also helps them. But then there's also mini routines throughout the day. So I still refer to routines when it comes to what are the steps you're taking every time you're putting your baby down for a nap? What are the steps you're taking every morning when you wake up? What are the steps you're taking every evening, right? Those are all mini routines. And if we work on establishing those first, that framework is helpful because then it leads to the larger overall routine. We get really stuck on the like whole day picture, but we have to kind of start small and work up.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think like some routines they're just sort of natural, because they're related to your own routine, like wake up, do X,
Yes.
X and X. But like I think adults need far less because with babies, you're doing sort of these same things over and over again, like, eat, sleep, or eat, change, sleep. Like it's just like the same, so that I don't know. It's a lot to manage, but so I know that you teach the 5 non-negotiables method for baby routines, which so many parents find helpful. So can you walk us through what those 5 non-negotiables are, and like what is this supposed to be? Like just explain that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. So if you just list them out, it sounds super simple and kind of boring, to be honest. But the whole idea behind why I created this as kind of like a framework for how I like to teach parents about establishing routine is that previously my clinical work was in pediatric occupational therapy in home healthcare, which means I was going into families' homes and working with their child there and the entire family, really, right? And so I saw a lot of how the inner workings of families and homes worked and what it looked like. And parents would have so many questions and be concerned about specific things. And I found it helpful to start by zooming out and saying to that parent, right, regardless really of how old the child is, this could be for a baby or it could be for an older child too. If you are checking the boxes of these 5 main things every single day and you have a good grasp on what these 5 areas should look like for your child's age, then you're doing great. And that is the best place to start, right? We can't get caught up in the weeds of certain details if we don't have these 5 areas, down well. That's not to say they need to look perfect, but it just to say that that's where we really need to focus. So the 5 areas are sleep routines, right? Which when you have a new baby, this is not going to look the same every day, but eventually it'll start to become more consistent. And sleep routines means naps and bedtime, and then what's happening overnight. Morning routine, which sounds funny that a baby would have a morning routine, but we can get into that if you want.
Totally. I think it's cute. Yeah. Totally.
Feedings and eating, whatever that looks like. And then play and outdoor time are the 2 others that we wouldn't necessarily maybe think of. So if you're getting outside every day, if your baby is allowed to play age appropriately, whatever that looks like for your baby, and then you have, routines around feeding, sleep, and mornings, then like that is the best way to structure the day because the entire day kind of falls into place from there.
Okay. So I feel like play and outdoor time are just, I feel like other people would agree, but I feel like those are the 2 where I'm like, ugh, do I even have a routine surrounding that? But they are also, I think, the 2 that stress me out the most.
Okay.
And here's why. And like, I think like for one, when a baby's little, I remember knowing that you had to that play was like a part of it because I'd see it like on the charts on Pinterest. I'd be like Googling baby routines and but I'd be like, what do I do? Like, how do I play with them? And like, how do I add this into my routine? And then I think like now that my kids are older, there's a definite strong pull on their side for wanting play with me specifically, which makes sense, of course. And I know it's important. But then also like independent play is not only critical to my mental well-being, but I think it's also important to them. And then outdoor time, it's just like we all know it's important to get our kids outdoors, but like I've never considered it as like part of my routine, but I am also not the most outdoorsy person. So I will mention that. And parks have never been my favorite thing. So like,
yeah. And it doesn't have to be a park. I mean, we can go into some examples if that's helpful for just like, what would this maybe look like in the newborn phase? What would it maybe look like as your baby gets a little bit older? Because it probably isn't going to look the same. It changes quickly, right? In that first year, especially.
Yeah. I mean, maybe just give like just so we dive in a little bit more into these like 5 non-negotiables, like let's say you're within the first, like you're still sort of figuring it out. You've had your baby, and let's say we're like, first 6 months or something. Like what are like your 3 biggest tips related to that? Or like how do we put this together?
All together. Yeah, it's definitely tricky. I think my belief for the first few months, if not really almost the whole first year, is that we want to make sure that feeding is going well first. That really needs to come first. I mean, from a medical perspective, developmental perspective, growth perspective, right? So that's what you want to focus on first. And there's so many ways to feed a baby. And I believe that however you want to feed a baby and however way is working well is the way you should feed your baby. But that does need to be going well. And so I think it is important to seek out help if you feel like that's not going well. But overall, in the first few months, we want to make sure your baby is being fed within the normal, typical range for their age, right? So that X amount of times per 24-hour period is really important. And there is a range, right? So that's not to say every newborn needs 12 feedings a day and every 6-month-old needs 4 feedings a day. I just made that up. But there's a range, okay? But that's the first thing to look at. So I would say you kind of have to prioritize. Feedings come first. And when feedings are going well, when baby's getting what they need, when there's no other factors that are kind of negatively affecting the feeding, usually then sleep becomes easier with time, right? And so same with sleep, then that's kind of second on our list. We want to make sure that we are at least offering the opportunity for baby to get their naps and their sleep in a developmentally appropriate number of times a day. That changes as your baby gets older. They will need to sleep less often over time until they near, right, their first birthday and beyond. So making sure you're aligning within the range for that is the kind of the second on the list. And then the other things come after that. So mornings will start to solidify once we have sleep a little bit more solidified, right?
Right.
And then it's a matter of like, okay, now we're left with certain windows of the day because we have feedings kind of plopped in there, right? Not at a certain time, but at a certain window kind of time. We have sleep kind of plopped in there, and sleep can happen on the go too. So I'm not somebody who believes like, oh, your baby's naps have to be in a crib. Okay, they can happen wherever they happen. So you can combine 2 of these. You can combine a walk outside with wearing your baby in the carrier and they're taking a nap. So it's like, how are we kind of like plopping them in? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So I guess you have quite a bit of freedom then. I mean, assuming you only have one, I feel like if you have more than one kid, just gotta like go with the flow. But we're all struggling over here. But yeah, I mean, I think we're just, reflecting back, like I think where I stopped was like, okay, feedings are good, sleep's good. We got something going with the mornings. And then I just kind of like did play in outdoor time, like whenever I had a moment. But
yeah,
I think it would have benefited me more, I think, if I had more of a routine, and perhaps I wouldn't have been so stressed out about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you go into the day with like a loose plan, right, of like, when am I going to go on my walk tomorrow? And I do think moms and adults in general, like, we have preferences for when we prefer things to happen, right? So it's like, I like to walk in the morning if that's you. So it's like, okay, so that means I'm going to wake my baby up. I'm going to feed them. I'm going to change their diaper. I'm going to eat something. And then we're going to go out for a morning walk. And then I'm going to time that with maybe my baby's second nap. They're probably going to fall asleep in the stroller or whatever. If you kind of plan that, it's not going to happen every day, but if you kind of plan that every day, at least as your goal, I do think it's really helpful for both you getting your needs met, right? And your baby. Your baby's getting outside and they're getting their nap and you're getting outside for a short walk. So it's like, could that have happened around the same time every day or at least in the same flow? I think it can help a lot of people.
All right. We're going to pause the show for just a minute because I want to share something personal with you. After having my first baby, I felt completely unprepared for how challenging postpartum life would be. I quickly realized that society just doesn't give moms the support we deserve. That's why I created Raising Mama, to make those early days just a little bit easier. Raising Mama pajamas are made from the softest bamboo fabric, engineered with micro gaps to help babies sleep better and give mamas a much needed boost. The prints feature uplifting messages like, "Mama, I wished for you," and "It's okay to ask for help." Phrases that are meant to prevent those negative thought cycles that so many of us struggle with during postpartum. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want to give you a special 20% off with the code Raising Mama Village. Plus, every time you buy a pair, we donate $1 to Postpartum Support International to support maternal mental health. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Now let's get back to the show. Okay. So I'm going to ask something kind of off the cuff here, but I just think it's like so fascinating what you do. Like, can you just describe to everyone like what you actually do, like as your profession and like how you got into doing this? Because I know you mentioned that like you know, you're an occupational therapist, you should be around in families, but like, I don't know, like I just think it's so cool and so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so funny. I still struggle with describing exactly where I feel like my expertise lies, if I'm being 100% honest, because it's kind of changed over the years as well. But essentially, it really all stemmed from my experience working in families' homes, as I said before. And I was working with a really wide age range. It was like babies all the way up to, later elementary school age. And I struggled a lot working with kind of the such wide variety of people, right? Like you're trained in a kind of more of like the medical side of stuff, but then you get into a family's home and you're like, wait, I actually have to speak to the parent and talk to them more than I'm even talking to the child in a lot of ways, right? And it's like, how do I even like explain? I need a framework for like explaining what is going to be beneficial for the child. And it kind of just dawned on me one day, and I kept coming back to the idea that all children really do thrive on routine in some way, right? That's not to say that it has to be, it's going to look different, but there's so much research out there about the benefits of having a structured day for young children. And it just felt like that was the easiest way to kind of explain things and to also make my suggestions. Like if I could suggest to a parent, hey, you should try doing this, they're probably never going to do it. But if I suggest to them, okay, you should try doing this, and why don't you like do it right after you do this every day? Or why don't you, have your child do it when they're already doing this? Or it was easier, I should say, to fit it all in. So it's kind of where it came from.
So, yeah. So what you're saying is that the like while you're doing occupational therapy, you're realizing that one of the best ways of like implementing these things is like making it part of their routine so that for one, like, it gets done, but two, it like makes more sense in their head.
Yes. And three, it requires less like work and mental effort on the parent, right? Because once you get into the rhythm and habit of doing something, you don't have to think so much about like when you're going to do it or how you're going to do it or if you're going to do it. So that was really the impetus for when I was still working with my families. And then it's kind of changed and evolved. And I think now it's really just like the framework for how I teach different parenting tips and strategies. It's the framework is putting it all into a routine.
How do you know if you're one of these people that like needs help in this area? Like, what are the...
So you're asking for yourself.
No, I just mean like, what are like the common, I guess, precursors to people contacting you?
So it's usually a single struggle that a parent is having with their child, right? So, and that will look different depending on, in the baby stage, it might look like my baby won't sleep, or my baby's like having issues with their feedings. As you get into the toddler stage and toddler and preschooler years, it's things like, behavioral issues, right? Parents will say these tantrums are out of control. They won't follow directions. It could be, I do a lot of work in potty training and how to make the potty experience more routine based. So those issues. So it usually comes from like one question or like one struggle. And then once we start talking, we realize that everything's connected. And so then it's like we kind of have to zoom out before we zoom in again, is like the approach.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then just so the audience, like in case anybody's not aware of what occupational therapy is, can you just give like a quick definition, I guess?
This is also tricky. So I've worked my entire career in pediatrics, but occupational therapy as a whole is a therapeutic helping profession. It is considered a kind of a sister science to physical therapy. And the word occupation does not mean like a job you have. It means what occupies your time. And is that activity working for you? Are you able to complete it? So occupational therapists can work with people across the lifespan. They can work with like older people or adults who have had an injury and can no longer perform their daily tasks that occupy their time, which could be getting themselves dressed, cooking in the kitchen, going to the bathroom. In pediatrics, we tend to focus more on the basic areas that occupy a baby or a child's time, which is really the things we've been talking about already, and behaving and existing in the world as well, if that makes sense.
Such a cool, it's
pretty broad.
Yeah, it's broad, but it seems so practical, and like it's just fascinating to me. Okay, so there's a lot of debate between baby-led parenting and strict routines. Like how I know that your take is like somewhere in the middle, like you've said, but how do you find the balance?
Yeah. So I believe that it's kind of something that kind of shifts as your baby gets older and older and kind of nears toddlerhood and beyond. It is important for there to be more structure to a lot of things, like to their day, to how you respond to certain things, to the boundaries you're setting. But that happens kind of over time. So I think that as a parent of a new baby, you are going to, we know that it is important to follow your baby's lead and their cues and their signals for what they need, for whether that's food or whether that's sleep or whether that's cuddles or comfort, right? And all of those things will still exist as your child gets older. They will still show you signs that they need and want all these things, and you should give them to them. But there should be more structure as they get older. Because evidence shows us that having this consistency as they get a little older has a lot of positive outcomes in the research. So if I hope that made sense of like, you start extremely baby-led, and then over time you're kind of slowly shifting that as your child gets older.
Yeah, and it's funny because it like almost seems counterintuitive because like as they get older, they can do more things. They want more independence. They have more of a say. Whereas like when they're little, you can kind of like make them do whatever you want them to do. Sort of,
Yeah.
But maybe that's the reason.
Yes.
Is like, I'm sure it has to do with language too. And like, you have to sort of read your baby a little bit more because like they can't tell you. Whereas, you know, when they become toddlers, they start becoming really opinionated. You have to like lay down the law a little bit.
Yes. And with that language, there's huge changes in brain development. I mean, there is throughout the entire first year, but especially as toddlerhood approaches, right? And it is normal and natural for them to want to assert more control and over their environment, right? Which is you. However, they also feel safer when you set limits around what that looks like. So young children will feel more safe and more secure when you are setting more firmer boundaries for what's allowed and what's not allowed. Because if they're just left to decide all this for themselves, it's going to be very chaotic. Whereas, you know, babies don't have that desire for control yet because as you said, they don't have the language to talk to you and they don't have their brain is just not there yet.
Yeah. So what's like the number one mistake that you see parents making when trying to do this, you know?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I do think overall, we've kind of talked about this already, but I do think, you know, it's so easy to get overwhelmed with, I want to put my baby on a schedule. I think we have to, I wish we could kind of flip that phrase and just kind of get rid of that phrase, put your baby on a schedule. And, you know, I would prefer us to be saying, I'm going to work towards a more predictable routine. Now, that is not how people talk generally, but I think that's where it kind of needs to go. And then I think, you know, we could talk about sleep specifically. I think sleep is a whole topic in and of itself, right, for babies and young children and parents. But one of the things that I think we're starting to, as a society, learn that's not true is that your baby will sleep better if you keep them up all day or keep them up longer. That is scientifically not true. And if anything, backfires further. But I think we hear that from the older generation. At least I do. I think they thought that was true when it comes to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely like heard that. And I know like my kids it's much easier to follow the rest of the routine if they get to bed early or on time, you know? Okay. So we know that routines help babies, but like for me, the biggest thing was that routine helps my mental health. So like, I mean, you're so big on routines, but like what impact does it have on the parents' mental health? Or like, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I love talking about this from a more personal perspective, as well as professional, because I personally struggled a lot with my own mental health, especially after having my first and a little bit after my second as well. But I had the routines in place to prevent that a little better. But yes, so having a baby is probably, I mean, I'm just making this up right now, but I would say it's probably the time in your life where your life changes like as so much in the blink of an eye, right? And you lose so much control and autonomy over yourself and your time. And I think that is just something that I find so hard to explain to somebody who has not yet had a baby, right? It's just like the loss of time freedom and the loss of control over your day. I think everyone who has a baby is nodding their head right now. And it's very normal for you to struggle with how you're feeling like mentally and emotionally when you have no control over like what your day now looks like. So this is another reason why, you know, helping your baby get some more structure to their day will provide predictability in your day, because then, you know, okay, at least I have a general sense of like when we're going to do things. And that is really important, right? The human nature is designed. We like control and we like to know when things are happening. People have varying degrees of that, but we all really do. And so having having some more predictability and kind of a sense of what your day might look like, or at least what part of your day might look like, really can help. And that's honestly one of the underlying reasons why I love doing the work I do, is because then I can help the parent, right? Like, people come to me with questions about their child, but I actually want to help you.
Right. Yeah. I think that's how a lot of these, areas are, of like all the practitioners and stuff that are focused, for example, like lactation consultants and sleep coaches, and like I feel like it's all about the baby, but I feel like we're all like unified in the fact that we're really just trying to help mama out, and because if you help mom, you're helping baby as well. But it's funny you say that, because I don't know where I read this. I'm always like quoting like, oh, well, I saw on Instagram, because you can see like what I do with my day. But I saw on Instagram somewhere like saying, talking about how, I think it was explaining, they talk about the identity shift of motherhood, and how it's actually maybe it's less so the identity change, but it's more like the loss of autonomy. And that would just like blew my mind, because I was like, yes, that's exactly it. Because I talk a lot about like how shocking becoming a mom was. And the biggest shock for me was the loss of autonomy. And people warn you like while you're pregnant, like, oh, you better go do all the things, because you're not going to have time to do the things anymore. But I think it really, like, there's a moment when it hits and you're like, oh, it just feels so permanent. So, and I am at least, personally someone that likes having control over my situation. So, I think, yeah, a routine's important. It's important for adults. It's important for babies. It's important for everyone. What if you suck at routines? Like
for yourself or for your baby?
Yeah, well, for me or for anyone. Both. Like it's hard. Like you could suck at routines for like many different reasons. Like you could have a partner that sucks at routines. You could have ADHD like me. You could have other kids. You could have, I don't know, like a life that involves more less predictable things happening. Like, do you have any like little hacks?
This is a good question. I don't like to sugarcoat, right? And make it seem like, oh, if you just do this hack, you'll be good, right?
Yeah.
But I really like to stop overcomplicating everything. And I think that's kind of why I created the framework I created, because I find that I think as parents, we're bombarded with information, right? Of you should do this, you should do that for your baby, you should do that for yourself, you should do this, that's that. And it's like, it's so much, especially in the modern day era with social media and the internet and all that. And I think if we stop and kind of take it all down a notch and start with the basics, like I said, you will realize that you're actually doing more than you probably think you are. Like you're probably not sucking at it. If you go to the basics and you're like, wait, I am doing that for my baby. I am doing that for my kid.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I think you probably are doing better than you think.
I mean, this is just like classic mom guilt kicking in,
exactly.
Just overly critical of like worried about my kids. But, but okay. So tell us more. So if, you're listening to this episode, it's resonating with you, you're like, dude, I need help. Tell us where people can find you and a little bit more about what you offer from the, the framework perspective. And
yeah. So the best and easiest place to find me is on Instagram at Rooted in Routine. That's a really good place to start. You can come check out all my content, send me a message. And then I had been wondering, what is the best way to help parents in an easy, affordable way? And I've from a business perspective, kind of played around with lots of different things. And something that I am now getting ready to launch in just a few short weeks is a membership. This is an online membership for parents who have babies, toddlers up to age 5-ish. And all the information we're talking about today, all of the areas, the non-negotiables, the specifics is all going to be in there. So you will have unlimited access to, the information, yes, and other parents in there and myself kind of guiding you along the way for how to actually implement it, right? Like, what should you be doing? What are you struggling with? How can we shift things? And so I think that knowledge paired with that sense of community that I really think a lot of parents don't have is what I'm most excited for. So that is called the Rooted Crew. It's going to be a crew of parents with little ones, and I'm really excited for that.
That's really cool. I one thing that I love about you is that you are so just genuine in your intentions and in like I can tell that in your thought processes, like you've really taken into account like what would be the most helpful and like how do I execute this so that, of course all of my time and effort is, it makes sense for me to keep going, but also in a way that like is actually going to be, but it's the occupational therapist in you. I think it really.
Yeah. I mean, as a new mom myself, even with my experience, I felt totally blindsided by the amount of things that you kind of were expected to know about babies and then eventually toddlers. And I thought if there was only just like one place to go that wasn't Google and wasn't social media scrolling, like how helpful would have been. So the reason why I'm launching it in this style is because it will be accessible on both an app and on a desktop or like on a website. And it's all going to be there. So it's like super easy to just pop in and find what you need instead of trying to go to a million different places or make all these appointments or, put it all together yourself.
Yeah.
So
I think that's awesome. We'll drop the links to everything in the podcast description. And thank you so much for coming on and talking to just me today. And we'll give all the details too of, what was it called again? Rooted Crew?
The Rooted Crew is the name of the new membership. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future conversations. And follow us on Instagram at Raising Mama Podcast for more updates, resources, and a peek behind the scenes. See you next time.